All right, so we're going to talk about how to estimate biological sex from the skeleton in an adult. This is an important thing to keep in mind that for children, especially young children, it's difficult to impossible to estimate sex of an individual. The sex characteristics that make it possible to identify an individual from their skeleton are associated with changes that occur during and after puberty. So the two main parts of the body should seem logical. They are the skull and the pelvis. So I'm going to give you a number of the characteristics that are associated with estimating biological sex, but not all of them. So first I'm going to talk about the differences with the skull, and I will write each characteristic down after I talk about them. So this is a male and a female skull. So one thing that you will see that on average there is a difference in overall size. And with that often is discussed a difference in overall musculature. But there are a couple of specific locations that I will talk about where the differences in musculature show up. So for one, there is a difference in size. This is not one of the main characteristics that we pay attention to. Okay. So on the skull, one of the characteristics that we will pay attention to are the brow ridges, as a colloquial name, supraorbital ridges above the orbit. Males have stronger or larger brow ridges than do females. In the same part of the skull, in the forehead area, females have a more vertical forehead. Males have a more receding or angled forehead. So this is the male as you look at me on your right, the female as you look at me on your left. Hopefully you will see that with the female, her forehead is going a little more vertical before it moves back at the top of the skull, and in the male, it's a little bit more angled. Oops. Okay. On the side of the skull, the bony area immediately behind your ear is called the mastoid process. So this is the mastoid process. In females, the mastoid process is relatively small. It usually doesn't go much below the ear canal, which is called the external auditory meatus. And so in males, the mastoid process is larger. So you can see on this individual, the mastoid process not only overall is bigger, it also projects or goes much further below the external auditory meatus. So what does the mastoid process do? It provides a muscle attachment location for the muscles on the side of your neck. Going toward the back of the skull, remember I said that in general males are more heavily muscled, so the mastoid process is one of those characteristics. Another of these characteristics is on the back of the skull. This area is called the nuchal area, and you'll see that written down to see how it's spelled in a moment. And again, the location on the back of your skull where the muscles of your neck and the muscles of your trapezoids connect, that's called the Nuchal Ridge. And in males, it's more pronounced. In some cases, it looks a little bit like a V. And in females, in general, it's not as pronounced. So again, you're right, you'll see a very pronounced nuchal ridge. And on your left, you'll see that the nuchal ridge is not as pronounced. Okay. So we'll move back around to the front part of the skull. With the eye orbits, there is a general difference in shape. In general, males have a more squared eye shape, and females have a more rounded eye shape. So when you look straight at them, you'll notice that. This is overemphasized like in cartoons. If you look at every Disney princess, she has huge round eyes. And so you see in general, the shape of the orbit is more squared. And then up here, there is a trait that we will identify for the eye orbit. Because of the more squared shape of the orbit for males, the bone on the outside portion of the eye tends to be kind of more rounded, and in females it tends to feel a little bit more sharp. So squared orbits, round orbits, female. All right, then last characteristic to bring up for the skull is with the chin. On the mandible, let me do that correctly. So on the mandible, on the jaw, there are two characteristics that we pay attention to with the mandible, with the jawbone. The first one is how squared versus how rounded the chin is. In some cases, it's obvious to look at it from in front. But often instead it's better to be able to look at it from the underside of the mandible. In females, in general, the shape of the chin at the front is going to be a little bit more rounded, where the shape of the chin in males is going to be a little bit more squared. And then the last one is at the jawline. This area is called the ramus. And so what we're looking at is the angle of the jaw. So if you hear people talk about men especially having a square jaw, so what we're looking at with that angle of the ascending ramus. We're looking at this location, what is the angle? And in males, the angle is closer to 90 degrees, and for females, that angle is much greater. And so in general, for male, the angle is going to be less than 120 degrees. And in general, for females, that angle is going to be greater than 120 degrees.